A person described as a friend of the McCanns, Rachel Oldfield, one of the so-called Tappers 7, was reported as saying she was disgusted at what appeared to be a deliberate smear campaign against them. She was quoted as saying, "I think there are some leaks coming from the police because a lot of what I have read recently has been completely untrue." The following day, the press referred to reports of an increasing backlash against the McCanns, both by Portuguese people and by fellow holidaymakers at the Ocean Club. The McCanns retorted that they would not be bullied and forced into leaving Portugal against their wishes. On Saturday that week, the Portuguese police acknowledged for the first time that Madeleine could be dead. Chief Inspector of Police Olegário Sousa told the police that new evidence had intensified fears that Madeleine might be dead, but made a point of saying that the parents were not under suspicion. Less than a month later, that was to change dramatically. The McCanns reacted once again via a family friend by denouncing the police for not having the decency to inform us first about their new theory. Portuguese press reports suggested that the Madeleine McCann investigation had now entered a decisive phase. They were not wrong. 2 days later, the McCanns did a round of interviews with Spain's 3 top-selling newspapers, claiming that there was a very real possibility that Madeleine was still alive. No doubt that took a little bit of organising by their media relations expert, Clarence Mitchell. The leaks continued, suggesting that evidence from the cadaver dog's alerts and DNA test results proved that Madeleine McCann must have died in the McCann's apartment. On the 24th of August, the McCanns were forced to react again, this time attacking preposterous speculation about Madeleine's fate. Jerry McCann says he is disappointed that so much information has been made public despite Portugal's strict judicial secrecy laws. A week later, on Friday the 31st of August, the McCanns announced they were going to sue a Portuguese newspaper, Tal and Qual, which reported, correctly as it happens, that the police believed the McCanns were responsible for their daughter's death. Months later, the magazine folded. The McCanns never sued them. Events soon overtook them. Another week later, on Friday the 7th of September, the McCanns were taken in for questioning by the Portuguese police. They attended voluntarily. They were not arrested, but they were interviewed under police caution. So let's now go to Kate McCann's account of her interview by Portuguese police, where she is shown a lengthy video of the cadaver dog Eddie alerting to the scent of a corpse in the McCann's holiday apartment. On page 248 of her book, Kate McCann writes, "Carlos, my solicitor, had advised me not to answer any questions put to me. He explained to me that this was my right as an arguida suspect, and it was the safest option. Any responses I gave might unintentionally implicate me in some way." On page 249, "If I'm honest, I'd been quite nervous about seeing the video of the dogs. I had no idea what to expect, although I was quite sure something couldn't be quite right about the results they had apparently produced. We knew from Bob Small, a Leicestershire police officer, that the responses of specialist dogs were intelligence, not evidence, but in my head I'd built up these film clips into the most damning evidence imaginable." Now Ricardo was giving me his spiel about the dogs. "These dogs have a 100% success rate," he said, waving an A4 document in front of me. 200 cases and they've never failed. We have gone to the best laboratory in the world using low-copy DNA techniques." I just stared at him, unable to hide my contempt. What did he know about low-copy DNA? These dogs had never been used in Portugal before. He knew little more about them than I did. Then Kate McCann describes the video she watched. The dogs went into our apartment, ran around the apartment, jumping over beds, into the wardrobe, and generally having a good sniff. She then describes this significant moment. At one point, the handler directed the dogs to a spot behind the couch in the sitting room close to the curtains. He called the dogs over to him to investigate this particular site. The dogs ultimately alerted. I felt myself starting to relax a little. This was not what I would call an exact science. At this point, we can begin to see how Kate McCann is trying to minimize the impact of Martin Grimes' report. Here, in a spot between the curtains, behind the sofa below the window, Eddie, the cadaver dog, alerted most excitedly. His nose was certain. There had been a corpse there. Later, Keeler the bloodhound located body fluids at precisely the same spot. Contrary to the impression given by Kate McCann in the above passage, the dogs were not together on the same day. they went on different days so as to get two separate sets of indications from the two dogs. Kate McCann continues on page 250 to pour scorn on the dog's alerts in the underground car park where the McCann's car and 9 others were parked. She noted that her car had posters of Madeleine on it, and so the handler, Martin Grime, she says, would have noticed that. In one passage she writes, "The handler stopped next to our Renault and called the dog. It obeyed, returning to him, but then ran off. Staying by the car, PC Grime instructed the dog to come back several times and directed it to certain parts of the vehicle before it eventually supplied an alert by barking." Did you notice that word "eventually" again? It implies that the dogs only alert anywhere after the dog handler has directed them to spot where he wants them to alert. Continuing down page 250, Kate McCann describes how the Portuguese detective Ricardo Paiva shows her video excerpts of the dog's alerts and then adds that in certain places blood had been found which matched Madeleine's. Kate says, "I said I couldn't explain it, but neither could he." She continues, "I remember feeling such disdain for Ricardo at this point. What was he doing? I thought, just following orders. Under my breath I found myself whispering, 'Fucking tosser, fucking tosser.' This quiet chant somehow kept me strong, kept me in control. This man did not deserve my respect, fucking tosser." So let's summarize before we move on to other topics. Kate McCann thinks one of the lead detectives on this case is a fucking tosser. Jerry McCann ignores the wealth of evidence that sniffer dogs are used reliably not only for blood and the scent of corpses, but also for drugs, explosives, and even certain medical conditions. He pigeonholes them all as incredibly unreliable, and both of them maintain that the most respected and sought-after dog handler on the planet doesn't know what he is talking about, effectively accusing him of gross professional incompetence. Now we'll have a detailed look at how the McCanns dealt with this explosive evidence, yet another aspect of the case that mainstream media won't touch with a barge pole. You can judge for yourselves how successful or otherwise they were. And we'll look at one US legal case the McCanns quoted in support of their claims that cadaver dog evidence was unreliable, the murder of Jeanette Zapata. And so we come, finally, to how Kate McCann now explains all the dog's alerts, 11 by the cadaver dog and another 5 in the same locations by the blood dog. On page 250 of her book, when researching the validity of sniffer dog evidence, Jerry would discover that false alerts can be attributable to the conscious or unconscious signals of the handler. From what I saw of the dog's responses, this certainly seemed to be what was happening here. Let's be quite clear here. The McCanns are claiming that the dogs were plain wrong. They are saying that all 16 alerts by the 2 dogs were false alerts. They maintain that top sniffer dog handler Martin Grime didn't know what he was doing. It amounts to a libelous attack on Martin Grime, basically accusing him of gross professional incompetence. Now that was what the McCanns said about the dogs in a book first published in 2011, 4 years after Madeleine went missing. But when the dog's alerts to a corpse and to blood were first reported to the press in August 2007, they reacted very differently. Let's examine what they said at the time. They came up with at least 7 different excuses. The first was that any blood found in the flat, apparently found having oozed underneath the tiles in the living room behind the sofa, where the wall and the floor meet, might have come from Madeleine's grazing her leg when she boarded the plane. It is very unlikely, however, that a graze on a knee at East Midlands Airport would produce significant blood hours later in Portugal. Any light bleeding from the graze would surely have stopped long before the plane touched down. The second excuse was that any blood might have come from a nosebleed. It was said that Madeleine used to have frequent nosebleeds. Both of these explanations seem highly unlikely, given the amount of blood that would be needed for a small amount to seep through the tiles. In addition, it is hardly likely that blood from a graze on a knee or a nosebleed would be located at the edge of a room where the wall joins the floor. Nosebleeds usually leave only a few spots of blood, if any, on flooring, usually being contained by a tissue or handkerchief or clothing. It's highly unlikely that Madeleine would have sat still while copious quantities of blood poured from her nose or knee onto the tiled floor, right by the living room wall. One of the more entertaining reasons for blood spatters being found on the wall was given by Jerry McCann's sister, Philomena McCann, a teacher at Ullapool High School. She claimed that they could have come from mosquitoes crashing into the walls. Funny though that they only crashed into the area below the window in the sitting room and not anywhere else in the apartment. That became the third excuse. Now we move on to reasons given for the scent of a human corpse having been found in the McCann's hired car. The fourth excuse was that the dogs had alerted to the smell of the twins' dirty nappies being carried in the back of the Renault Scenic. That amounted to a suggestion that Martin Grimes' cadaver dogs could not distinguish between the smell of a toddler's feces and the scent of the past presence of a human corpse. The fifth excuse was that the dogs got confused with the scent of rotting meat. But these excuses failed to explain that as well as Eddie the cadaver dog alerting to the smell of death, Keeler the blood dog had also alerted to the presence of blood and other body fluids. An ingenious sixth reason was put forward, this time by Kate McCann's mother, Mrs. Susan Healy. She claimed that the smell of death may have been found on her clothes because Kate was said to have been in close proximity with no fewer than 6 corpses in her last 2 weeks at work. So far as this excuse is concerned, the claim that she visited any corpses during the last 2 weeks at work, never mind 6, has never been confirmed. Further, those doctors who have to certify the cause of death do not always handle the body, nor handle it long enough or closely enough for the smell of death to be transferred to clothes. Further, this excuse only explained the smell of death on Kate's clothes. It didn't explain how the smell of death came to be found at 4 places in their holiday apartment, nor in their hired car. A 7th excuse was given to explain why the cadaver dog Eddie alerted to the scent of a corpse on the pink soft toy Cuddle Cat. Kate explained that she sometimes took Cuddle Cat to work. A newspaper report, based on sources within the Portuguese police, explained at the time, Kate didn't contradict the fact that her 2 pieces of clothing and the stuffed animal Cuddle Cat had been signalled by the English dogs trained to find cadaver odour. She justified it by her profession. Kate McCann's mother alleged that as a doctor at the Leicester Health Centre, she was directly present at 6 deaths before she came to Portugal on holiday, giving the same excuse for Madeleine's stuffed animal that was with her in the months after her daughter disappeared. Quite apart from being unlikely that a mother would take a child's favourite stuffed animal to work, never mind having it with her when she was close to corpses, it appears that experts say that it is not usually possible for the smell of death to be transferred in this way. Altogether then, within the space of weeks, the McCanns had given these 7 bizarre excuses for the alerts of the cadaver and blood dogs. But these excuses were all very unconvincing. Let's now go straight to the witness statement by Jerry McCann, given by him when he was interviewed under caution by the Portuguese police on the 7th of September 2007, the day he was declared a suspect. It was a long interview, beginning at 4:05 and going on until 10 to 9 at night. During this interview, Jerry was also shown videos of the dog's alerts. Here is how the interviewing officer recorded Jerry's responses. After viewing the films, and after the signalling of cadaver odour in their room, next to the wardrobe and behind the sofa against the window in the living room, he says that he has no comments, neither has he any explanation for this fact. The dog that detects human blood signalled human blood behind the sofa mentioned above. He says that he cannot explain this fact. Regarding the cadaver odour in the car that was rented at the end of May, he says he cannot explain more than he already has. Regarding the presence of human blood in the boot of the same vehicle, he says he has no explanation for this fact. When confronted with the fact that Madeleine's DNA was collected from behind the sofa and in the boot of the vehicle and analysed by a British laboratory, he says he cannot explain. When asked if on any occasion Madeleine was injured, he says that he has no comments. In the aftermath of the shock of Kate and Jerry being made suspects, the McCanns and their ever-growing team of PR advisors and lawyers immediately began to pour scorn on the evidence of the cadaver dog and the bloodhound. They quickly cited, for example, an Irish court case where the judge would not accept the cadaver dog evidence alone because it was not corroborated. They claimed there were Irish and American lawyers who had been able to cast doubt on cadaver dog evidence, pointing to a US study which allegedly showed that cadaver dogs could be fallible. One case in particular was trumpeted by Jerry and promoted in the British press, that of the arrest of an American, Eugene Zapatar, for the murder of his wife, Jeanette Zapatar. Jeanette Zapatar was still missing, but a cadaver dog had alerted to the scent of a corpse in locations at their house and at a storage container associated with Eugene Zapatar's business. On the 17th of September 2007, just 10 days after the claimants had been pulled in for questioning by the Portuguese police, the Times published an article titled, "Kate and Jerry McCann Send to US for Help Against Evidence of Sniffer Dogs." The article told us, the parents of Madeleine McCann have contacted the lawyers of a man charged with murder who successfully challenged sniffer dog evidence. His lawyers claimed it was unreliable and persuaded a judge in the US to throw out prosecution claims that the dogs had detected the smell of a corpse. Jerry and Kate McCann hoped that the case could help them to prove their own innocence. Portuguese police believe that the couple may have killed their child accidentally and then disposed of the body using a car they hired 25 days later. Although the McCanns do not know the full details of the Portuguese prosecutor's case against them, they are concerned that it may rest on the dog's reaction. Now their lawyers have requested the case files from the ongoing murder trial of Eugene Zapatar in Madison, Wisconsin. His estranged wife Janet, a 37-year-old flight instructor, vanished in October 1976 after taking her children to school. Her body has never been found. Detectives suspected that Mr. Zapatar killed her, but did not have enough evidence to go to court. Mr. Zapatar, 68, was charged with murder last year after sniffer dogs were brought in. They allegedly detected the scent of human remains in a basement at the former family home. But Dane County Judge Patrick Fiedler ruled that the evidence was inadmissible, saying that the dogs were unreliable. He quoted analysis of the three dogs' performance record, which showed that they were respectively incorrect 78%, 71% and 62% of the time. The judge told the court, "The state has failed to convince me that it's any more reliable than the flip of a coin." That is what the British press have told us about. But now comes the bit the British mainstream media have never told you about. Not long after the Times article, Eugene Zapatar confessed to killing his wife, and in making a full confession, he confirmed that the alerts of the sniffer dog used to search for where his wife's corpse may have been placed were wholly correct. In late 2007, a US newspaper reported, "Zapatar enters guilty plea in connection with missing wife's death, the Eugene Zapatar case." During the past 2 decades, the ability of sniffer dogs to reliably detect an increasing number of substances has expanded greatly. Wikipedia, for example, tells us that sniffer dogs are used for all these purposes. Wikipedia adds that one notable quality of detection dogs is that they are able to discern individual scents even when the scents are combined or masked by other odours. We know from Martin Grimes that Eddie had never once been wrong in over 200 cases where he detected the smell of death or blood. Cadaver dog evidence has played a part in the conviction for murder of many criminals beside that of Eugene Zapatar. Here is a list of some of the cases where sniffer dogs have resulted in convictions or raised major doubts about claims by their parents that their children have been abducted or just disappeared. Finally, what are we to make of the attacks by the McCanns on the professional competence of the dog handler sent to Portugal, Martin Grime? The McCanns have publicly trashed his work on their daughter's disappearance, claiming that the dogs were doing no more than responding to his conscious or unconscious signals.
This is the first time that you give us a big interview, not being arguidos since then. So now I feel free to ask you this directly. How can you explain the coincidence of the scent of cadaver felt by British and not Portuguese dogs?
Sandra, maybe you should be asking the judiciary because they've examined all this.
But don't you have an explanation for that?
We're obviously Madeleine's mum and dad, and we're desperate for people to help us find Madeleine, which is why we're here today. The majority of people are inherently good, and I believe the majority of people in Portugal are inherently good people, and we're asking them if they'll help us spread this message to that person or people.
So you don't have any explanation for that?
Ask the dogs, Sandra.
Ask the dogs, no, Jerry. Now I think that I feel free to ask you. Don't you feel free to answer me?
I can tell you that we've obviously looked at evidence about cadaver dogs, and they're incredibly unreliable.
Unreliable.
Cadaver dogs, yes.